away, like a car accident or sickness that forces them to miss a week of work and a paycheck, that will throw their lives in financial ruin. Is this president doing his promises to make their lives better? President Trump is calling his tariffs Liberation Day. You think Canada feels liberated from the bully neighbor that is Donald Trump? Do you think Greenland feels liberated from the bully nature? Do you think Panama feels liberated? What about universities that are cutting NIH funding, that are cutting the scientific research that will cure the diseases in the future, that will alleviate suffering, that now aren't allowing postdocs to come to their school? They're not hiring, they're slashing the number of engineering students that they're allowing in because they're terrified because this president is menacing indirect costs. Is that liberation? "71 days in, now 72 days, I asked you, are you better off than you were 72 days ago economically?" I asked that question. Ask it to your friends. Are they better off economically? Well, I don't see how they could be, because prices are up, stock market's down, the risk of recession is climbing, consumer confidence is in the gutter, 401k plans are losing value. Are you better off than you were 72 days ago under this president's leadership, on the verge of his so-called Liberation Day that's going to drive prices up even more? And he's doubling down on tax cuts for the rich. He wants an economy that works for him, his billionaire donors, his powerful special interests, and it's coming at the expense of working people who are struggling to get by, and a lot of the programs that they rely on, like for their health care, like for their Social Security. He wants an economy where the richest people get the biggest tax cuts, where the largest corporations, heck, they may get to skip out on taxes altogether, and where hardworking Americans are getting crushed by rising food prices and rising rents. This idea that that might trickle down. But we know it doesn't work. He's continuing the same reckless economic approach he used in his first term. Massive tax cuts that inure mostly to the wealthy, unchecked spending, rapacious spending, big holes in our national debt, trillions of dollars of more debt, and no serious plan on how to pay for any of this thing that he's doing. From Social Security to public health to the education that supports children with disabilities and scientific research, the safety nets that millions of people depend upon. Here's the New York Times. Trump's policies have shaken a once solid economic outlook. This is from March 7th. President Trump inherited an economy that was, by most conventional measures, firing on all cylinders. Wages, consumer spending, and corporate profits were rising. Unemployment was low. The inflation rate, though higher than normal, was falling. Just weeks into Mr. Trump's term, the outlook is gloomier. Measures of business and consumer confidence have plunged. The stock market has been on a roller coaster ride. Layoffs are picking up. And by the way, this was March 7th. We just finished March, the worst performing quarter in years in the stock market. Back to the article. Layoffs are picking up, according to some data, and forecasters are cutting their estimates for economic growth this year, with some even predicting that the U.S. gross domestic product could shrink in the first quarter. And some commentators have gone further, arguing that the economy could be headed for a recession, a sharp rebound in inflation, or even the dreaded combination of the two, stagflation. Most economists consider that unlikely, saying growth is more likely to slow than to give way to a decline. Still, the sudden deterioration in the outlook is striking, especially because it is almost entirely a result of Mr. Trump's policies and the resulting uncertainty. Tariffs and the inevitable retaliation from trading partners will increase prices and slow down growth. Federal jobs cut will push up unemployment and could lead government employees and contractors to pull back on spending while they wait to learn their fate. Deportations could drive up costs for industries like construction and hospitality and the agricultural sector that depend on immigrant labor. In quotes, if the economy was starting out in quite good shape, it probably is in less good shape after what we've seen the last few weeks, said Donald Rismiller, chief economist at Stratgas, a research firm. The U.S. economy has repeatedly shown its resilience in recent years, and there are parts of Mr. Trump's agenda that could foster growth. Business groups have responded enthusiastically to Republican plans to cut taxes and reduce regulation. A streamlined government could, in theory, make the overall economy more productive. So far, however, the Trump administration's approach to economic policy has been characterized more by chaos, tariffs that are announced and then delayed, government workers who are fired and rehired, than careful planning. Michael Strain, an economist at the conservative American Enterprise Institute, I know AEI well, said Trump's policies on trade and immigration and his slash and burn approach to federal job cuts would have a damaging effect. This is a conservative think tank. What President Trump has proposed will not cause a recession, he continued, but it will slow economic growth. It will take money out of people's pockets. It will increase the unemployment rate. It will cost people jobs. It will make American businesses less competitive. That's AEI, folks. It is certainly possible for Mr. Trump's policies to come together in a way that causes a recession. His tariffs alone could shave a full percentage growth in the domestic product this year, according to some economic models, enough to cut in half the 2% growth rate that economists expected going into this year. Many economists contend that deporting millions of immigrants, as Mr. Trump promised to do on the campaign trail last year, could be even more harmful than tariffs, given the U.S. economy's need for workers, particularly in industries like construction and healthcare. And the administration's push to shrink the federal government, an effort led by Elon Musk, could leave hundreds of thousands of federal workers and government contractors looking for jobs when hiring has slowed. That could set off a chain reaction. Workers who lose jobs or worry they might would pull back on spending, which would force businesses to cut costs, leading to more layoffs and further reductions in spending. Ordinarily, that would prompt the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates and shore up the economy, but that could be difficult if tariffs are also pushing up prices, making policymakers nervous that cutting interest rates could spur inflation. It's a death by 1,000 paper cuts, said Jay Bryson, chief economist for Wells Fargo, certainly not a great liberal organization, Wells Fargo. He says all things individually aren't enough to cause a recession, but if you layer them on top of one another, it might be. Most economists think such an outcome is relatively unlikely, however. Mr. Trump has repeatedly delayed full enforcement of his promised tariffs. For example, on Thursday, this article is from March 7th, he suspended tariffs on most imports from Mexico and Canada until April. What month are we in? April. His deportation efforts have likewise gotten off to a slow start, and some of the cuts to the federal workforce have been tied up in court, as they should be. Such delays and reversals will help blunt the impact of Mr. Trump's policies and could make a recession less likely, at least in the short term, but the prolonged uncertainty could have its own costs, leading businesses to delay investment and hiring decisions. If we don't get clarity by the back half of this year, economic uncertainty can be like a deer in the headlights, said Nancy Lazar, chief global economist and at the investment bank Piper Sandler. Things just stop. Business confidence is muted, employment is muted, and capital spending is put on hold. Even if Mr. Trump's policies don't cause a recession, they could do long-term damage. Lower immigration will leave the country with a smaller labor force as a native-born population is aging. Trade barriers will be a relatively modest drag on growth while in place, a chronic condition rather than an acute one. It's less the economy is in a car wreck, and it's more like the economy has decided to start smoking a pack a day, said an economist at the Roosevelt Institute. In certain places and for certain groups, the consequences could be harder to ignore. Veterans, who make up a disproportionate share of federal workers, could be particularly hard hit by government layoffs. So could parts of the countries that depend heavily on federal jobs. Apparently, there are signs that home prices in the Washington metropolitan area are falling. It's going to be substantial for certain communities. When you look at the aggregate, it's going to be challenging.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I talked or texted with this person who's asking me to yield the floor. I've been letting this power go to my head. I've never, in the Senate, had the ability to hold the floor and leave a person in a little bit of limbo. I just want to say that Tim Kaine is one of the friends, and honestly, he's like a pastor to me. He's one of the more honorable men I've met in my life, and struggles like me about faith and public service. I read your book. I really hope more people read your book. I didn't think it was going to be as beautiful as it was. I laughed, I wept. When you were attacked by spiders and things like that, I'm sorry I was laughing at your misfortune, sir. It's a book about you going through your whole state. By walking the Appalachian Trail, canoeing. Every story you told moved me. It's a great book. I've read a lot of my colleagues' books, but this one really touched me. You have this beautiful view of America, and I want people to read your book. I really want people to read your book. So if I should yield, I'll yield only if you'll tell people the name of your book and maybe tell something about it. This is extortion on the Senate floor. I'm going to hold on to the floor unless you agree to that. You can shake your head up and down if you agree. All right. Then, of course, to my dear friend, and somebody that I probably wouldn't be standing here. We had some discussions about procedural opportunities and things like that. He had to make some concessions to me. I won't give details, but he's an honorable man, and in the crux before I came here, he really helped to clear the pathway for me to stand here now. I owe you a lot of my 12 years. You are like a big brother to me, and I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, thank you to my friend, Senator Booker, and to all who are gathered to watch this very, very important vigil. And the question that I'm going to ask in slow motion to give you a chance to think of a response,
God bless you,
is a question that was inspired by your colloquy with Senator Coons, where you guys were
not a colloquy, that's not allowed. It was a question.
You were discussion, where you were doing some Bible quoting back and forth. And as you know, I'm a big Bible reader. And the thing I thought about, and actually I've thought about it during your talk since last night, is this part of the Gospel of Matthew where he's challenging people that he thinks are hypocrites. And he says to them, you can discern the faces of the sky, but you can't discern the signs of the times.
Wow.
That's Matthew 16:2 and 3. You can discern the faces of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. The way I view this vigil that you have been powerfully engaged upon is you are attempting to discern and explain the signs of the times to your colleagues and to our country, and that's very important that we do. And I'd like to ask you one question about the signs of the times economically to follow the discussion of what we're seeing, but then I want to ask you a question about the signs of the times more in the nature of our democracy. So to begin, on the economy, you walked through how strong the economy was on the day this president was inaugurated. And 2 months later, the challenges of a volatile stock market, the challenges of rising prices, the challenges of declining consumer confidence, the challenges of predictions that there might be slow growth or even a recession. We will have a vote on the Senate floor tomorrow about Canadian tariffs. Based on a resolution that I've introduced that we will have a vote on. You talked at length about those tariffs and the effect that they have on Americans, as Mr. President and others. As I've traveled around my Commonwealth, my farmers and my small businesses, they've seen it before. They saw it in Trump term 1. They know how dangerous it will be. They don't want to pay more for groceries. They don't want to pay more for building supplies. Farmers don't want to pay more for fertilizer. My shipyards don't want to pay more for aluminum and steel. They were promised that they would pay less, not pay more. They don't want to be part of a campaign to demonize a nation that has been a friend of the United States and stood side by side with us in every war since the War of 1812. They don't want to be part of a juvenile assertion by this president that that sovereign nation is the 51st state. They don't want to be part of a name-calling effort to call the prime minister of a sovereign nation governor. They're trying to read the signs of the times. Why is this administration that came in with such a strong economic hand doing so much so quickly to both hurt us economically, but also to tarnish a relationship that has stood the test of time with an ally? The president often says that his goal is America first. We would all agree as members of this body in America first, but we would all passionately disagree with America alone. What is America alone gonna get us? What
For those of y'all who are
we
just
turn
hopping
to?
on,
Who will we
we're
turn
kind
to when the
of
allies
a very
that we've spent
interesting place
decades
right now where
building
multiple of the
relationships
senators
with
are
now
helping
feel
a lot
pushed
more
aside?
frequently
Yesterday,
to give
China announced
their
that
book
they were going to
report.
be working with
Free to drop any questions
Japan
in
and
the
Korea
comment
on a
section
free
about both
trade
up
zone,
there,
possibly
and again,
to
I'll do my best to
respond to U.S. tariffs. Other nations are having to engage in hedging behaviors because they thought we were friends, and now they doubt that reality anymore. And so as you look at the signs of these economic times, and then I'll get to a second question about the signs of the times in our democracy, how are we to understand this? And more importantly, how are we best to rectify it? How can we stand up for our families and reduce their burdens, not increase them? How can we stand shoulder to shoulder with linked arms with our allies to face off against adversaries? Reflect on the signs of the times and point us in the right direction. Please, question mark.
I appreciate that. I'm going to try to keep it short, but I want to reminisce with you about something that, do you remember in Trump's first term that he used a national security waiver to put tariffs on Canada then?
Yes, yes. And my citizens really remember it because they suffered.
Yes. But do you remember, we had a Foreign Relations Committee meeting, and a leader, I don't want to embarrass the leader, but a leader from Canada came, it was a woman, and she sat there. It was a bipartisan group together. You do remember this?
Yes, I do.
So she sat there, and then she started very slowly going back to the War of 1812 and marched through Canadian-American history. I confess I have a degree in history, but I didn't know all this history. But these amazing stories of Canadian sacrifice to stand next to Americans, to die next to Americans, to fight for America, to join our artists, our cultural communities, our arts, our agricultural communities, all the things we've done in hand to make both of our nations stronger and more prosperous. And then she looked at us and said, and then your president, in a sense, calls us a national security threat.
Yep.
And you all put tariffs on us. And I remember the quiet, the silence around that committee table. I felt like, whoa. This is such an ally, such a friend, such a consistent ally of us throughout the hardest, difficult times of history, never left our side. That her litany was so admirable. And then she looks at us, a national security waiver to put hardships on our economy, national security waiver to put tariffs on. And they hurt Americans, and they embarrassingly hurt our northern neighbor. But I thought that was bad enough. Mm-hmm. And now, what kind of bully are you? What kind of mean spirit? Do you look at your northern neighbor and say, I'm going to call you governor, not with the title you earned by the people that put you in that office? It is the worst kind of behavior, and nobody calls it out. Of our Republican colleagues, not enough of them call it out, I should say. So we are in, as I read in that article, in an economic crisis, and I question how long will we wait until more of us join in a chorus and saying enough is enough. I don't know the answers. I don't know how we can stop him, but I know we did in the first term. We pushed back on him successfully on his attempts to try to take health care away from tens of millions of Americans, and we can do it again, but more people have to do things differently. They have to do, like we've been talking all day, and I'll turn to my colleague again, as John Lewis called us, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, heal the soul of America. We have to do more and follow the examples of our forefathers and foremothers who never gave up, with conviction and determination, with an indefatigable spirit, unyielding grace. They continued time and time again, pushing back and bending the arc. It's our turn. What are we going to do? All of us have to answer that question. But I know part of the answer is we have to do more.
Will you yield? Will the senator yield for another question?
I yield for a question, but I will retain while retaining the floor.
This is a question about the signs of the times in our democracy. We will celebrate 250 years of American democracy in 2026. And I want it to be a celebration, not a coronation, not a requiem, not a wake, but a celebration. A week ago Sunday, 250 years ago, Patrick Henry stood on the floor of Henrico Parish, now known as St. John's Episcopal Church on
I will accept the question, but I am
at a moment of decision,
doesn't say that explicitly,
where people were challenged to understand the signs of the times.
At
a moment of tyranny. And he asked the immortal question, and I almost view your vigil as asking the same question about where we would stand in such a moment.
And then move on.
And there were different forks in the road, a phrase that has attained some meaning recently. And Patrick Henry said, as for me, give me liberty or give me death.
Some people are arguing it is a filibuster.
You're giving a liberty speech, my colleague. You're giving a liberty speech as the nation begins to think about 250 years.
So I just want to add that context for y'all.
The opposite of liberty, that which Henry was fighting against, was tyranny. I am one that believes that we should mark anniversaries. We shouldn't just act steady state like this country was ordained and will just go on forever regardless. We're coming up on 250 years of American democracy, and there is a live question about its continued existence that this generation is grappling with. Henry gave that speech at St. John's Church, and a few months later, July 4, 1776, the U.S. declared its independence from England. And our history in this new chapter began. And at various points along the way, during the 1850s, say, or during the 1950s, generations just like ours have had to grapple with the question of whether the experiment will continue or not. Some of our national symbols have some unusual aspects to them that point to this experiment. We have a national anthem that ends with a question, not an assertion, not a declaration, but whether the flag will still stand over the home of the free and the land of the brave, question mark. The state flag that Virginia adopted on July 5, 1776 is a most unusual flag. It has a woman representing Roman virtue standing astride a deposed tyrant whose crown is knocked off, who is holding a broken chain in his hand that he's laying on the ground. It's one of only 6 state flags with a woman on it. It's the only state flag that features toplessness, which occasionally creates some raciness in schools as students ask about it. But it's also the flag with the most unique state motto of any state. All states have mottos. 49 state mottos are positive. Hope, Eureka, Excelsior, onward and upward, ad astra per aspera. Michigan's has the most unusual positive motto. In Latin, if you seek a pleasant peninsula, look around you. Well, I wasn't looking for a peninsula, but I'd rather it be pleasant than not. Virginia's is the only flag and the only state with a motto that's not positive. It's a rebuke. Sic semper tyrannis. Thus be it always, thus be it ever to tyrants. George Wythe, Thomas Jefferson's teacher, was in charge of designing the flag and chose that as the motto. Think about the verb tense, right? It's the only one that's a rebuke. And it has stayed on our state seal and state flag since July 5, 1776. Many state flags have been changed in the last 20 years. Utah's changed, Minnesota's changed, Mississippi's changed, Georgia's changed. Virginia has essentially not changed since 1776. Neither the figure of virtue standing astride a deposed monarch or the motto, sic semper tyrannis, again, the verb tense, semper, always. Ever. It's not in the current tense, no tyrants are down with tyrants. It's in the future tense, thus be it always to tyrants, thus be it ever to tyrants. The Virginia flag that we pass by in Virginia every day without thinking about it, it's in every school we pass it by. It asks us two questions 250 years later. Do we retain the ability to recognize tyranny? Do we retain the virtue to defeat it? Can we recognize tyranny? Can we retain the virtue to defeat it? My friend, you are standing on the floor in the tradition of Patrick Henry 250 years later. You're raising a question about liberty and our fidelity to it. And so my question to you would be, what gives you hope that the answer we will give to these questions as Americans, as those commemorating a quarter millennium of American democracy, what gives you confidence that we will answer these questions in a way that will honor those who came before us?
I want to answer that question. I want to first say that Hakeem Jeffries is here. And now I'm worried because two Brooklynites are shaking hands. And I confess, when I had the floor and Schumer was, for the only time in my life I could deny him the right to speak on the Senate floor, I confess to my friend, who's part of the X generation, hip-hop generation, my brother who is part of this transition in American history, from the greatest generation to the baby boomers, from the baby boomers now, we're seeing leaders emerge that are X-geners, millennials, and he represents so much of the best of the future. I want to, this question's so good, okay, because you didn't honor your commitment to me and talk about your book. But I just want to say that I insulted Brooklyn for stealing my nets. I told the leader, I abused my power to retain the floor, and I told the leader that there's only one football team in New York, the Buffalo Bills. The other two are from New Jersey. I could have reminded the leader that the chairman of the board who sings New York, New York is actually from New Jersey. I could go on with this litany, but I do want to get back to your very serious question about tyranny. I think many of us have read books like On Tyranny, and we're doing a lot. We're reading articles of people are talking about the fears that they have about this document. And you and I have had serious conversations over the last 72 days of Donald Trump's presidency. How much of the encroachments, I would say encroachment is a gentle word, of the separation of powers is happening. We're watching justices or judges from Republican appointees to Democrat appointees trying to stop him from doing things. Which one of our great Bill of Rights amendments from freedom of the press? He is doing things to the press that, in my opinion, are bullying them, breaking with traditions that presidents have done in the past, trying to create press corps like Putin or Erdogan have, where they only let people in the room who will give obsequious supplications, often for the dear leader. What about the freedom of speech? You and I both know the reprehensible speech is protected. Disappearing people for what they said. Scalia talked very clearly about having rights even when you're in the country. One of the most conservative justices said, you have rights. We're seeing him invoke emergencies. You've been the leader in our caucus talking about the absurdity of these emergencies he's doing, and you've tried to rally this body to say, don't let this happen. You've talked to me about all of these things. So what is the limit of tyranny? Well, you and I, and we talked about this with your book, I'm trying to get back there. I told you once when Skip Gates did my history that he traced my history back to Virginia. I try to show you that I have more Virginia legitimacy because my roots go back to 1640 in your state. the Stampers came over, following down, 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 then Henrietta Stamper, who my mom still talks about as a relative, John Stamper, and the chart that Skip Gates gave me, the only thing he could say about John Stamper, the mother of Henrietta Stamper, was slave woman. Born Henrietta Stamper, they called her on her documents mulatto, and Stamper fought for her ownership because it would later come out that that was his child. And these are the traditions in my family. It's really amazing what Skip Gates did, and showed me that I'm the direct descendant of slaves and slave owners. I'm the direct descendant of a Confederate soldier that was captured in retreat. I'm a direct descendant of Native Americans and people that fought in the Creek Wars to kill Native Americans. And these traditions in our country, I draw upon all of them. I'm proud of all of them. They speak to us. They speak to the complicated history of America. But perhaps one of the best things I got about this complicated history was a visit to my office by, I don't know if I told the leader this. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to return to this question, but I think I know how busy the leader is. So I will, if the leader asks me a question, I will, if he asks if I'll yield for a question.
Yes, will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Now, before I ask my question, what a tour de force. You are amazing. You have, it's not only the amount of time that you have spent here on the floor, what strength, but the brilliance of your indictment of this awful administration that is so destroying our democracy, that is taking so much away from working people in the middle class, and at the same time, all for tax cuts for the billionaires. You're amazing. We salute you. America salutes you. All eyes are on you. You're incredible. Now, here is my question that is related to what our Republican friends are trying to do to all the things that you were so opposed. So are you aware that while you were here on the floor today, Senate Republicans are declaring that using the current policy baseline is up to Lindsey Graham, not the parliamentarian? I believe that this is going nuclear, and it shows how hell-bent they are on giving tax breaks to the rich, even if it goes nuclear, even if it violates all the norms that they have had, even if it breaks all the promises they have made. Do you agree with me that this is just a move that is so against what the traditions of the Senate have been about, but not just the traditions of the Senate? Fairness, decency, ability to debate issues fairly. They're afraid to debate them. They're afraid to defend tax cuts for billionaires. They're afraid to admit they're taking away Medicaid from so many Americans. And so they come up with this nuclear option, showing that they don't care anymore about norms, about rules, and even about going nuclear, which the leader, the Republican leader, and all of them said, oh no, they're not going to do that. Well, now they say they're going to do it. What does the senator think? Does he agree with me that it's going nuclear? Does he agree with me that is a nasty, vicious, and self-seeking for the billionaires, which is what they're doing, way of proceeding?
Chuck, I'm not 100% right now, and you just hit me with stunning news that I can't even think about how to respond right now. I'm stunned by that. I wish, if you want to ask me a question, it has to be a question. I wish you would explain it a little bit more, because what you're basically saying to me is that we're not going to go through the parliamentarian, that this is a gimmick that is going to be done to try to break really with the Byrd rule requirements of reconciliation. I'm using Senate speak, and I don't think we should use that. So what they're going to try to say is obscure the impact of the reconciliation. They're going to obscure the incredible tax cuts the cost of trillions of dollars to our economy, blowing up our debt. So-called fiscal hawks are going to blow it up. I'm stunned by this news.
So if asking the senator, the great Senator Booker, a question.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Does he agree that this is just a blow to the people of America, and it shows that the folks on the people on the other side are only interested not in playing decent, not in playing fair, not in being honest with the American people, but taking money out of the pockets of working people and the middle class and putting it in the hands of billionaires? Is that something that this country should just countenance because it does so much harm to the country and does it not show what our colleagues are really like and what they're after?
Yes, the answer to those questions is yes, but I just want to more say it's the further breaking of the Senate in a severe way. It's breaking of the Senate. Every time you break the Senate like that, to do another big nuclear option thing, the next time around, when the pendulum swings, I've been here for 12 years, I've watched it swing back and forth, there's no going back now.
Would the senator yield for another question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Does the senator remember that when this was done in the past, McConnell said they would regret it and they'll regret it sooner than they think? Does the senator agree that that applies to the Republicans? They will regret it and they will regret it sooner than they think.
I hate to answer the question this way, but America will regret this day. American people will regret this day. All of us will regret this. All of us will.
I hate to bring the senator
You have
news,
to
but I'm
ask
asking
me-
him a question.
Yes.
And I needed his answer, given how eloquent he has been about what America should be and what America should not be. And so I yield the floor to the senator.
You yield the floor because I have the floor, sir.
Yes.
I retain the floor. This is one of the few times in my life I'll ever get to tell Chuck Schumer what the rules are here. I just want to get back to you, and maybe there's a better way to get to you by sharing a story I don't think I've ever told you. It was a few ago with one of Biden's last State of the Union speeches, and we all had to vote on the floor about an hour before the speech, and then we would come back here and assemble to do this extraordinary walk through history. And so days before that, I was with the leader, Hakeem, and I was with some other people in the Oval Office with the president, and the president had put his arm around me as we finished the meeting and said, "Hey, Cory." I'm like, "Yes, Mr. President. I got a big speech coming up." And I know, Mr. President. And he goes, "I'm going to go to Camp David and work on it." And I said, "Okay, Mr. President." He goes, "Can I call you if I need some help?" And I said, "Yeah, right, Mr. President. Sure." And that was it. The weekend, he didn't call me for help with his speech. And we came here and did that vote an hour before. And then I like walk out that door. And many people know this. I like going, if I can, I go straight out the next doors onto the steps. I love those steps. Maybe because I watched Schoolhouse Rock as a kid, and that's where Mr. Bill, I'm just a Bill. And so I pause sometimes there and just feel this sense of gratitude, and the Supreme Court right in front of me, the Library of Congress, and stand in the right place, see the gold dome behind you. And as I'm standing there in that moment, an hour before we have to hustle back here, my phone rings, I answer my phone, and it begins with what I think is one of the top stupidest questions in America. You've gotten this question. I think you would agree with me. You're not the kind of guy that uses words like, "Hey, this is stupid," but this is stupid. The thing I heard, the stupid question, this is the White House operator, "Will you hold for the President of the United States?" Who says no to that question? And as one does when they get a call from the President of the United States. And so I say, "Yeah, I will hold." Wait a minute, I'm washing my hair, you know. I say, "Yes, of course." And next thing you know, it's Joe Biden. And he goes, "Cory." And I go, "Mr. President." He goes, I'm struggling with my speech. And at that point, I know you weren't this kind of student in college, but all my guilt from my college days of waiting to the last minute to finish a paper were gone. The President of the United States is waiting to the last minute to finish a speech. Heck, I feel good. And so he goes, Cory, can I read you a section of the speech? And he read me a section of the speech where I have a lot of policy depth, and I couldn't believe it. The President of the United States, hour before his speech, rehearsing a part of the speech, and then he asks me that immortal question, you're a married man, you have to give me good advice on how to answer this question when your spouse looks at you and says, how do I look? You're torn between two things, right? Maybe to tell the truth or tell your spouse what they want to hear. Tell me what you answer with. You can't do it now because I have the floor. And so I take a moment. Am I going to tell the president what I really think of the section, or am I going to just say, yeah, eater? So I decided, he called me up hour before speech, he must really want my advice, and I gave some hard input. Turn this dial down more, turn this one to whatever. And he said, okay, Cory, abruptly he's gone. I go home to the office, back to the office, I tell my chief of staff, I just got a call from the President of the United States. He asked for help with a speech. What a crazy life moment while I stood on the steps like I'm just a bill. Anyway, we get back here and it's a wonderful moment in the Senate. I don't know if anybody has the privilege of seeing what we do. We all gaggle around those doors. We talk to each other. People think we always fight and yell. That's not the case. Democrat, Republican merge into this ball of senatorial humanity, and then those doors open. I love it. Because you walk out. You walk past Thune's office, which used to be the Library of Congress. You walk past the old Senate chamber, where some of the greatest debates in American history and violence on that Senate floor, with the caning of Sumner. You walk through the dome, the statue by an 18-year-old woman named Reams of Lincoln, the suffrage leaders, Martin Luther King, presidents, extraordinary presidents. Then you walk past where the old house used to meet, and you love this, I love this, those little gold plates on the floor where presidents had their desks, exactly where the presidents have their desks. Most people go in right under Junipero Serra, California's statue. Under that cross is Lincoln's gold plank, people that were in the House and served in the presidency. That's not my favorite one, though. It's John Quincy Adams. Why? You know this. The only person in American history ever, it'll probably never happen again, where somebody went from the presidency and came back to the House, ran for a House seat, worked at that spot where that desk was till he collapsed, was carried off the floor, he would soon later die. Amazing. Maybe if the president will, maybe Obama's going to get, and I got to run for House. Then you get into that old chamber. And we sit down, we find our seats, and that great moment, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, when that person walks in and says, the President of the United States of America, I still get that feeling. Joe Biden comes in, and I think he sets a record for the longest it would take to get from those doors all the way down. Everybody he's talking to, Marjorie Taylor Greene, what's up? He's just touching everybody. He gets up there, he gives a speech. Now, you know that this is an aerobic event. You stand up, you sit down, you stand up, you sit down. You got to get your squats in when you're doing it. Get the exercise a little while. Well, this part of the speech he called me on is, and I'm sitting down, and I hear my input in the speech. I don't know if you all noticed it, my colleagues, but I was the first person to stand up for that section. And I was looking at shots. Get up, man, this is the best speech ever given. It was amazing. I go home, I'm kind of bummed at the whole experience, and then I'm lying in bed, and I unfortunately have my phone on my nightstand. It goes off, and I see a number I don't recognize. I open it up, and it says, Senator Booker, this is John Meacham, the great historian. Thank you for helping the President of the United States with this speech. You made more of a difference than you'll ever know. And my first thought was, how do I print this out? How do you print out? So he gave me a cell phone number, and now I'm going to troll him. I'm going to keep calling him until this historian comes to my office, and finally he relents, and he comes. And now he steps into your domain, my brilliant friend of history. I express worry, fear, concern, demagoguery in our land, rising of tribalism. I dump on him. I'm normally a prisoner of hope. I'm normally a purveyor of finding your joy, even in the toughest of times. And he listens for a while, and then he looks at me and says, Cory, there's nothing about this time that is unprecedented. It's all precedented. You want to talk about demagoguery? And he goes through every generation of Americans having extraordinary demagogues. I read Margaret Chase Smith's incredible speech on this floor against the demagogue and the demagoguery within our own party. He talks about the #1 radio show in all of America. The majority of Americans listen to his anti-Semitic screeds. Father Coughlin. He went through them all. And he said, you want to think worry? He said that there was an American general in the Depression. He said his name, I'm forgetting it now, I'm not at my best, and said that this guy was calling for a military takeover of our democracy. You want to talk about authoritarianism? He talked about a senator here on the left who was calling for the people to storm the Capitol. He went through this all, and he said, every single time Nazis in Manhattan, at Mount Garden, I couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. I wish people were there listening to this guy as he went through all these. America was at a crossroads when we came upon a moral moment. And he said, what happened, how we chose the right path, when people were trashing this document or treading on it or undermining it, when demagogues rose to the highest points of popularity in our land, how did we stop it? Well, he looked at me with some sympathy and said, not you guys, not a senator. It was that the better majority of American people said enough. They chose to define the soul of our country. He gave that phraseology to our president. And he said the soul of America is not people in office, it is the everyday citizens who choose the better angels of their nature, who choose right over wrong, who recognize a moral moment and know that they have to stand up and bend the arc of the moral universe, or more importantly, steer the ship of our state out of the troubled waters into clear, open sea. I rose here, and I've gotten into lots of questions with my colleagues, but I rose hoping to read more and more of the stories as many Americans as I could. And during the night, my friend Chris Murphy and I read a lot of them. You know me well, my friend. You know the truth of all of us in this place. You know the truth of everybody. We're all mountain range. We all have peaks and we all have valleys. You, my friend, have seen my valleys, me at my worst. I failed as a leader at times, or at least come up short from my own personal expectations. You've seen me at some of my better moments. I know we have obligations. I know people are right to be upset or demanding of us right now. Please help us. What are you doing in the face of people that might make it so that we might not have elections, or might make it so that we do break things in this government that can never be fixed? As one of the speakers that came into our call, the people that wrote the book, How Democracies Die. Great nations, great civilizations, forget democracies, don't necessarily die from external threats. They die from internal corruption. Look, think of the Roman Empire. Think of the Soviet Empire, crumbled from its own corruption, failure to live up to its promises and ideals. We are at this moment. I am here to tell you, America, to tell my colleagues, and anybody who cares to listen to a senator from New Jersey, that we are at that moment. We're past that moment. Every day things are happening. The 72 days of this administration, God, if there's not enough to upset you, to ignite you, to realize that maybe you and your family are not getting hurt. Other Americans are, our veterans are, our seniors are. We've told their stories here over these last 21 hours, 22 hours. We've told their stories. People are getting hurt. People are afraid. People are worried. And people I don't even agree with are getting disappeared. Law firms that I've known for my entire career, are being forced to kowtow to this president. Universities that should be the bastions of free speech, free thought, free enterprise, intellectual research, academic research, scientific research, are getting torn up by cutting indirect costs. I read stories of PhD programs that are virtually being canceled from the best scientific minds, not being able to build the state-of-the-art labs. The country that has led humanity in scientific invention is taking a blow. And Fareed Zakaria, I read his article here, and he's saying that China is doubling down on investments on the universities as this president is cutting them, unless, of course, you come to the leader, make all these commitments, meet all of these demands. There should be enough already. It should be enough already. And so this is that moment John Meacham told me about. I want us to try in the Senate. I know my colleagues. I see Tammy Bowles. I see Chris Murphy. I see Angela Osmos. I love you guys. I've served side by side with you. I know your passion. I've heard your anger. I've heard your fear. I've heard how you want to fight for this country. But we are not enough. We can do demonstrations. We can do demands. We can try to do things differently. In fact, we must. I will definitely yield to Tammy Baldwin, my friend and my colleague.
To another question.
Thank you very much. I don't have that much gas in the tank, but hold on, let me say it right. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
So noted.
Thank you.
Senator, since you have taken the floor, which I suppose is nearly a full day now, there have been new breaking news of mass firings. Perhaps others have come to the floor to talk about it, but you were just talking about how great democracies are shredded, sometimes from within. Look, one of the pieces of breaking news today was the mass firing of our nation's public health agency within it. Today it was reported that the Health and Human Services Department began firing up to 10,000 more people. It's more than the previous firings, including researchers, scientists, support staff, and senior leaders. These are people who are doing work to keep our children safe from preventable illnesses, and researchers who are searching for cures and treatments for diseases that plague our families, like cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer's. And look, we can all agree that government could be and should be more efficient. But here is where I disagree with the unelected Elon Musk and people like our president. People stopping the spread of measles. Yes. Researchers find cures for Alzheimer's disease are not waste, fraud, or abuse. The slash and burn that is being led by Elon Musk's Doge will make Americans less healthy, less safe. And Elon Musk's Doge and Donald Trump are callously ripping away treatments, cures from millions of Americans suffering from Alzheimer's disease, cancer, ALS, and other devastating diseases. Behind these cures are, of course, workers. And they are some of our nation's brightest and best and most devoted. They keep our nation healthy and our economies running. But this administration is not respecting their work, their mission. And I have to point out the why. What is the why to all of their actions? Today announced that they're starting that slashing of 10,000 workers within the Department of Health and Human Services. By the way, with more in store, because last week they announced an reorganization that would result in 20,000 people losing their jobs. But what is the why? Ripping the rug out from under cancer and Alzheimer's disease and ALS patients is all in service of finding the money that Elon Musk and Donald Trump need to cut taxes for themselves and billionaires like them. And yes, big corporate tax breaks. They are cutting cancer cures for corporate tax breaks. Senator Booker, these cuts to health and human services are going to crush families in Wisconsin, whether it be people not having hope for a cure for a disease, or to the workers who are doing this groundbreaking research all across the United States who are going to be fired. In New Jersey, what will these firings mean for the people who you represent?
I'm so grateful for the question, because that's what we said we were here about. We're here to try to elevate the voices of people affected by what they're doing to our government. And frankly, as they cut the Department of Education completely, or the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, they're getting rid of agencies that were created by Congress, and many people are right to believe that it can't be eliminated without congressional action. And we were talking before with people here that the majority, the biggest plurality of people being laid off from all of them are veterans. And again, I'm going to be back in New Jersey this weekend. I'm going to try to be at a rally, a town hall. I know everywhere I go in my state, I'm going to hear from who are rightfully angry, who are rightfully afraid, who are affected by this, who are fearful of what's to come. These are such important human emotions. But the question then is going to be for all of us, and I know people will be questioning me, what are we going to do? What can I do? What are you going to do, Senator? And so I don't have a brilliant response. I don't have some prescient idea that we are going to be able to change the course of this, but I know we're going to fight. And I want to be honest with you, I wasn't sure we could stop Donald Trump when he tried to take down the ACA. I just wasn't sure. I really wasn't. I did not know how that would end. People gasped. Do you remember that in this room? I remember that. People gasped. We did not know. It was really, usually it has very predictable actions. That's why I'm still standing here, because I didn't want the predictable. I didn't want business as usual to happen. It's rare that we have unpredictability on this floor. It's usually finely orchestrated. You and I both know this, but that day, no one expected that, or at least wasn't sure. It was drama. It was a moment, and we won. And I want to tell you this, I said this earlier, when I say we won, I don't think there's one senator here and the 99 others that convinced John McCain of his vote. I know who did, though, Arizonans who stood up, who spoke up, and demanded more from their leadership, not to hurt people, not to hurt folks who needed that, not to hurt folks with pre-existing conditions, not to hurt children. So I am one of these people who wants to learn from our history. I want to stand here today and tell you I'm going to do everything I can. I'm willing to go to some lengths. But I am inadequate. You are inadequate. We're senators with all of this power, but in this democracy, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. This is a moral moment that more Americans need to stand up and say enough is enough. I'm sorry. The civil rights movement wasn't won because of just a few blacks who stood up and were really articulate. No, they called to the conscience of this country, and the country responded. And it was a rainbow coalition that said, this ain't who we are in America. So I know New Jerseyans are hurting. I know I've been to your state. I love your state. I love sitting side by. We had some fun in your state together. We've seen young artists, business people. This person that says this word over and over again, more than any Republican or Democrat, buy American, and created so many jobs in your state. We were in some packed restaurant. People packed, not to see me as a special guest, but to listen to your story. You are a trailblazer too in this Senate. You are doing things that our founders did not expect, and you know that. And you want to stand up. I heard you in our caucus. I heard you in the Schumer's leadership meeting, standing up for people that are most marginalized, most looked down on, most talked about. I hear you, Tammy.
Will the senator respond to another question?
I won't respond to a question. I'm going to read this for the 75th time. I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you, Senator Booker. You just talked about your visit to Wisconsin. You've had many. But one that you're talking about that I remember really well and really fondly. I had the privilege of hosting you and showing you what our state had to offer.
Yes.
Something that I likely bragged about then, like I often do, is that the Badger State is known for making things. While I know you don't indulge in all of the things that we do make, because of course we have our iconic products like
Yes.
beer and brats and cheese, but we also build motorcycles and big industrial ships and engines that power our Navy and so much more. That's right. Make one too.
Yes.
Build them. And of course, behind it all is our workers, as you were just talking about. And whether they are in a marsh harvesting cranberries, we're number one in cranberry production.
We're in the top
country.
5 in New Jersey.
I know, but we're number one. Not that I'm competitive here. Or whether we're on a foundry floor or whether that worker is on an assembly line, workers are what make our economy go round. And so naturally, they are the ones we should be prioritizing in all of our policy. But that's not what this administration is doing. They are going to get a slap across the face when the administration slaps across the board tariffs and gets us into a trade war.
Yes.
And it's going to be these workers who pay the price. And Wisconsinites are really worried about what we're going to see this week. They worry about their businesses. You met so many of them when I hosted you. Their livelihoods, their communities. They're worried because we have all been here before. Wisconsin was one of the hardest hit states by retaliatory tariffs last time Donald Trump started a trade war. During Donald Trump's last trade war, American farmers lost $27 billion in export sales. And according to further records, the state's economy lost more than $3 billion worth of product sales, product exports. And our manufacturing economy in Wisconsin, well, we lost about $26 billion in exports. And you know what? The exports that Wisconsin manufacturers make is supported by more than 460,000 jobs. And our agricultural economy is supported by 350,000 jobs. And so a trade war would be devastating to the workers of Wisconsin. And then the prices. People have been struggling with the high price of things in grocery stores, at gas stations. A number of our business leaders have spoken out about the impending tariffs. Ariens Company in Brillion, Wisconsin, which makes outdoor power equipment like snow blowers, told Reuters News that policy whiplash in this arena is making it difficult to plan, especially as price hikes are likely in the works. And Roden Echo Valley in West Bend told one of our media outlets, WTNA4, that, and I quote, "I don't like this tariff business. It's going to be on the backs of farmers because we have to depend on the world to export our commodities." He highlighted the dependency of the dairy industry on global trade, noting that 15 to 20% of dairy products are exported. And if we lose, I quote again, 15% of our markets for dairy, it's going to be absolutely devastating. We've seen this before. Again, in service to a big tax break for billionaires and corporations. But to my esteemed colleague from New Jersey. Thank you for visiting the state of Wisconsin. And I want to ask what the impact would be in New Jersey. What would President Trump's tariffs mean for the workers of the Garden State?
I love that you focus it there, because that's who President Trump made to in my state. That things are bad with this economy because it's not serving people who are working every day. Promised that he would make things better. I'll make grocery prices go down. He said that. And so people are expecting that's where he'd focus. They didn't think he'd focus on Greenland. Didn't think they'd focus on the Gulf of Mexico. Didn't think he'd focus on bullying Canada. Didn't think he'd focus on turning his back on Ukraine. Didn't think that he'd focus on gutting the Department of Education and ending it. This is not the reason why people voted for them. They did something that Reverend Warnock calls as a vote is a sort of prayer. He says it's like a civic prayer, that I'm putting a prayer out there that you will be who I hope you can be. You will be a blessing to my life and not a burden. But you're talking about the burdens that he's bringing. This economy, under 72 days, has not gotten better for working Americans, and they don't even see the president trying to make it better. They see what he's doing to make it worse, and one of the things is going to be these tariffs, which are going to raise costs on working Americans. Then what Chuck Schumer said to me, it's sounding like it's going to just sail through a plan that's going to blow trillions of dollars of holes into our budget, give trillions of dollars of tax cuts to the wealthiest, and gut your Medicaid, and gut your services for your grandparents in nursing homes. People believed, people put their trust. I don't blame them. They're my fellow Americans. They wanted for them families, they wanted an America that was more affordable. They wanted America to be first prioritized. They wanted a safer America, stronger America, more prosperous America. I heard that. And so I know when I'm back home this weekend, I know that I'm going to encounter a lot of folks who are workers in my state who are getting hurt. They want better. They want better from their government. And so the burden upon us and each other is, what are we going to do? Are we going to do the same old thing over and over again? Or are we going to try to do things different? Are we going to be willing to, again, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, to try to save the soul of this nation? I think my colleague, my dear sister, my prayer partner, my soul lifter, I thought I heard you say something?
Yes. Will the senator yield for a question?
Yes. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, I first of all want to thank you so much again, Senator Booker, for your spiritual obedience. And I think it's necessary for me to say as well today to you, on behalf of so many of us who are watching, right, extraordinarily proud we are of you. I would dare say that you are, in so many ways, our ancestors' dream, and how powerful it is for all of us who are watching to recognize that in this very chamber you are standing today, 67 years after this podium was used, for the 24 hours that you have used the podium that was used to block the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1957, and today you have taken over the podium, sacrificed your own comforts. You have suffered over 22 hours to stand here today to talk instead about the greatness of America, and to speak about it in such a way that reveals the love you feel for our country, and we thank you for that. This country needs right now bravery. It needs leaders who are unafraid to stand up and speak truth to power, to not hold back when calling out these callous and inhumane acts that are perpetrated by this president against the American people. And when I talk about the American people, we know who we're talking about: against our veterans, against our seniors, against our children from every corner of our country. And I want to talk specifically today about our children. Mahatma Gandhi noted that the true measure of any society can be found and how it treats its most vulnerable members. This president is failing America's children, and he's doing so by harming our education system. We remember as well very fondly when Nelson Mandela said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." And I think many of us recognize that is exactly why we're seeing all of the attacks that we've seen on this system, because we recognize that education allows us to change the world. Last Friday, Secretary McShut shut yet another critical lifeline off to our states and our schools, canceling extensions that the department had previously granted to states to draw down their COVID relief money. States like Maryland originally got extensions to finish spending the remainder of these critical dollars on long-term projects, like teacher recruitment, tutoring, and other services for students. We know in particular Anne Arundel Public Schools brought Chromebooks for students with their funds, but Maryland still has a remaining ESSER balance of nearly $150 million. $150 million, that's on top of the millions that have already been clawed back, frozen, or withheld from the state by this administration. These are funds that districts like ours from all across the country were using for school construction projects and mental health supports for students. This administration is refusing to acknowledge the lasting effects of the pandemic on our nation's students, cruelly stripping educational opportunities from our students and leaving our states and our districts on the hook. So let me be clear that these are dollars that Congress authorized, dollars that have already been allocated, dollars that have already been earmarked by Maryland and our local districts for projects that will help all of our students. Our schools planned and committed these funds in good faith, Our states have acted in good faith, and this administration is acting in bad faith, pulling the rug out from underneath them, blowing a hole in their education budgets. Our governor had this to say, and I quote, "The clawback of these previously committed funds would place an undue burden on our school systems and undermine our collective efforts to strengthen education across the state." And this is only the latest attack on public education by this administration, the latest attack on our schools and our students, the latest attack on our teachers. And we saw this administration attack HBCUs by freezing funds for the 1890 School Scholars Program, which provides tuition for students at our land-grant institutions. We saw this administration and Secretary McMahon slash teacher training grants, which help prepare our educators to serve our communities. We saw this administration proposing to move the student loan program to the Small Business Administration, threatening students access to aid and the promise of higher education. We saw this secretary and this administration lay off half of the staff at the Department of Education several weeks ago, firing over 1,300 staffers. And I want to talk for a minute about who the department fired. And by the way, these are people who are not incompetent. These are people other services outlined in their individualized education program that they will have an advocate to help them. And at the time that this administration took over, there were over 270 open Office for Civil Rights cases impacting 1.3 million students in my state alone. Without enough OCR staff to do the job, investigators' caseloads will grow to an untenable level. So we spoke to some of the lawyers that work in the division that serves Maryland schools, and all of these patriotic civil servants All they want to do is to do their jobs. They want to combat discrimination in our schools. They want to ensure that every child has the opportunity to learn in a safe environment. And these civil servants don't know that that mission is possible, as they and so many of their colleagues are ruthlessly fired by this administration. These cuts are catastrophic. I dare say that they, like so many other decisions by this administration, are wicked. And so, Senator Booker, here is my question. What are you hearing from families in the state of New Jersey as this administration dismantles the Department of Education and slashes opportunities for students and families?
I'm so grateful for the question from my friend, and that's the centering that we've been trying to do, which is what are families in New Jersey and around America thinking? As you said, the Department of Education, and we read that earlier today, it doesn't dictate or educational policy to states, but it does do a lot to do funding for special needs kids in the states. And so I'm already hearing from parents of kids with special needs and what the impact it will have if those resources are cut. Everything from the programs that help children young people afford college, to programs that I've worked with people that help schools afford advanced scientific equipment so the bright minds, the geniuses of our state and the country can have the equipment they need. This administration is cutting things that are hurting families, and we are hearing from them. We're hearing from veterans, we're hearing from the elderly, we're hearing from people that are taking care of the elderly, we're hearing from people who run our hospitals, we're hearing from people that run our universities and who talk about the science funding and the cutting of PhDs. We're hearing from people who rely on Medicare and Medicaid, who rely on Social Security. We're hearing from people that are appalled that their nation bullies smaller nations like Canada or Greenland. We're hearing from people that are shocked at what they're doing to the most vulnerable people who come to our nation, who have American children, who have American spouse, or being disappeared off of our streets, that have no criminal record. We're hearing from people that don't think it's right that a president should have a meme coin that allows him to enrich himself, to hawk his power and position for even greater wealth. And so I've done everything I can, and I'm going to do more. I've still got a little gas in the tank to elevate those voices.
Will the senator yield for a question?
Before I yield, because I just keep wanting to exercise this power that I might have for a little while longer, and exercise it over a man that I have a real chip on my shoulder. He's a senator from Arizona. Yeah, he's been a military fighter pilot. He's been an astronaut, has been out of this world. But what ticks me off, sir, I've said nice things about everybody else, but I'm not saying them about you, sir. Because when I go home to New Jersey and I walk through my airport, I was a Newark mayor, my airport, I see your big, bald head up in big picture of you saying New Jersey Hall of Fame. Mark Kelly. Who the heck am I? You're the senator from Arizona, but yeah, you're right, okay. You're this great, celebrated military veteran and astronaut who grew up in New Jersey, who went to high school in West Orange, whose parents were cops. And so you have the accolades in my state, and I am proud of that. And proud I get to serve with you. I still have the floor. Stop trying to speak.
Well,
There's rules in this place. Don't make me think the parliamentarian or the presiding officer. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Senator, my apologies for the big
With
giant...
that kind of deference, I now will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
My apologies for my giant mug at Newark Airport, where I
overshadow me literally.
As Senator Booker knows, I did grow up in the state of New Jersey. And growing up in New Jersey, I came from a very working class family. My family didn't have a lot of money. My dad was a cop. He was a union member. From my earliest days of remembering my mom going to work, she started out as a waitress. And I remember those days after working these night shifts at these banquets, how tired she was. She would work some long hours. And then she became a secretary, but she also would work as a waitress at the same time. And this was just to make ends meet. Eventually, my mother decided that she wanted to become a police officer like my dad. But this was New Jersey in the 1970s. And for a woman to become a cop, it was really, really hard. It was practically unprecedented. And my mom had to take a written test and then a physical fitness test. And the physical fitness test, it was designed for men. And part of this test required that my mom climb over this 7-foot 2-inch wall. Now, my mother was all of about 4 feet 13 inches tall. And to help my mom out in passing this test, my dad built a replica of this wall made out of a door between 2 pine trees in our backyard. He didn't tell her he made it an inch higher at 7'3". And I'd watch my mom go out there after dinner every night and try to get over this thing. And initially, she couldn't reach the top. And when she finally could, she would usually just fall off into the dirt. But my mom, she wasn't one to give up. And eventually, she was able to get over this thing. But it took her a long time. But she practiced for months. And when she finally took this test, instead of getting over in the required 9 seconds, she got over in 4.5, much faster than almost all the men. And my mom became one of the first female police officers in northern New Jersey. And she kept that job for a long time until eventually she was injured. And by the way, it was the union that protected her rights after being injured on the job. But I remember how this job changed our lives economically. Both of my parents having good paying union jobs. It meant more money coming in the door, more money for our family, more money to play sports. It was part of what allowed my brother and me to chase our American dream, to serve in the United States Navy and eventually both of us as astronauts at NASA. And we were able to do that because our parents worked hard and they sacrificed for us. And because of the support we had, including some really good public schools. That's harder today